Welcome to Open Spaces. For Wyoming Public Radio News, I'm Camila Gadalska. Bill Gates' nuclear power project in Kemmerer is officially under construction. We talked to a reporter who was at Terra Power's groundbreaking last week.
You think of like Springfield and The Simpsons and the old legacy plants, but there's not a whole lot to see just yet.
We hear from a landslide specialist about what can happen when it rains over a wildfire burn scar.
Basically, we say debris flow is a flash flood on steroids.
And we head to the gym with a 68-year-old powerlifter.
Lift and push through your feet. So you act like you're pushing your feet through the floor. So that's how you do deadlifts.
Turns out, heavy weights are good for your bones, brain, and social life. Those stories and more coming up on Open Spaces.
Our reporters are the kind of people you just want to grab a beer with. And now you can, at least if you're in the Laramie area. On Thursday, May 7th, we'll be at Laramie Blacktooth from 3 to 8 p.m. Stop by to grab some swag and chat with us. Plus, $1 from every pint sold will be donated back to the station. Bring your friends and raise a glass to public radio in Wyoming.
Welcome to Open Spaces from Wyoming Public Radio News. I'm Camila Kadalska. Terra Power is Bill Gates' nuclear power project in Kemmerer, and it is officially under construction. That's thanks to the company clearing a final permit from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. NPR's Western correspondent Kirk Siegler was there for the windy groundbreaking and joins us now. Wyoming Public Media has covered a few groundbreakings for Terra Power at this point. What was this one about? Why was it special?
Well, they had already technically broken ground, to your point, and started construction a few weeks prior. It was interesting being there, though, because I reached out to some of the folks in town that I've been, following up with over the years and covering this story, because I think we're in year 5 of this story. And they didn't even know it was going on. And they were kind of like, groundbreaking? I thought we already went to that. Although I will say it was so windy that on the quote-unquote groundbreaking of the construction starting, we didn't get to see a whole lot because the crane had to be shut down because of the high winds, which I know is not surprising to any of your listeners probably in Wyoming.
No, it's pretty normal for the spring here. But you kind of beat me to the punch. Can you paint me a scene of the site? What did you see when you were there?
It has a sort of a futuristic vibe. I think a lot of stereotypes and tropes of the nuclear power industry, we think of like Springfield and The Simpsons and the old legacy plants. But there's not a whole lot to see just yet. What has been erected is this enormous testing facility, or it's being built, but it is kind of popping up out of the prairie there. And then just a smooth 50-acre or so campus where they're smoothing out, where they will soon put what they're calling the nuclear island. And that's basically the entire plant, or most of it, will be underground, making it different, among other reasons, than a conventional nuclear plant. And, of course, when you pivot to the left just a little bit, you can see on the horizon the old coal-fired power plant is still there, and they're actually converting that to natural gas. So when we were originally covering this story, there was often discussion that this was going to replace that plant and actually hook into some of the same infrastructure. That may be true, but of course things have changed in the energy market lately. It's sort of interesting when you drive in, you have to have an escort. It's, high security, probably a construction site of any power plant. So the first thing they tell you is make sure you back rear in, which I had to sort of think when you park, well, this is a nuclear plant. And, they're saying safety is paramount. Nobody had to, get a quick getaway, but it kind of struck me as high security, but also big time safety out there in the prairie.
Yeah, that's interesting.
They're planning to use sodium instead of water to cool the reactor. And that will, they say, among other things, be safer, but it's also a more efficient and quicker process to build than legacy nuclear plants that take more than a decade.
So you mentioned that they're going to be using liquid sodium instead of water. Do we know how that will work and how, like, what kind of safety tests they've done in the new tech? I'm more interested in, like, can Kemmerer folks sleep easy at night with this in their backyard?
They are insisting this is a safe and proven technology. They spent years testing it. They'll still be testing it on site. Sodium has a much higher boiling point than water in a conventional nuclear plant, and they point to that. It also creates less waste, radioactive waste, that for now is going to be stored on site. There has been a little bit of opposition over the years to this and some skepticism about it, but at least outward-facing folks in town are very excited about this, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of concern. Folks in Kemmerer are very excited about the prospect of 200 or more long-term skilled labor jobs, not to mention the 1,000 or so that's expected to be there in the short term for construction.
So you mentioned there's a nearby power plant that's actually the not-in power plant. It's going to switch from coal to natural gas, raising some questions for the coal mine that powers it. And we've heard from some local leaders that they hope Terra Power can absorb some of these workers in transition. Did you get a sense of that happening?
Well, this has been the promise all along from Terra Power. It's not totally clear how much retraining will go on if, in fact, the 100 or so folks at the power plant continue to keep their jobs. A bigger question and a bigger anxiety still in the town is that the coal mine is still the largest employer in Kemmerer, and that's a very unknown right now about what's going to happen to that because, of course, they're not now supplying the nearby coal-fired power plant, and they're searching for new markets. But despite what this administration is trying to do with coal, generally speaking, economically, it is not penciling out for a lot of communities right now.
The plant is expected to come online in 2031. Who will use the electricity it makes?
I think it's maybe a little too soon to speculate, but when the company tells me that it's about enough power for 450,000 homes or close to 500,000 homes, what's the nearest city? Well, Salt Lake City. So I think it's pretty expected that this plant will start feeding the grid, Rocky Mountain Power, and likely go to the nearest major metropolitan area. Now, Terra Power does have other plans to build sort of site-specific, pending approval, reactors for data centers themselves. But in this case, you know, the energy market is changing so much. You traditionally would build a power plant, hook it right into the grid. But with the proliferation of data centers and AI, a lot of tech companies seeing the uproar over these energy-sucking data centers are looking for companies such as Terra Power, I'm told, to build site-specific power plants that can then, you know, power the actual data center itself. And so we're in kind of an evolving energy market where you're not necessarily building plants these days just to enter the grid. One big hurdle, independent of building all these new plants, if this is really going to happen, is where we're going to get the uranium. So Rocky Mountain states like yours in particular are eager to kickstart a uranium mining industry, but that comes with a lot of baggage in the West, in particular with radioactive contamination in native communities and other places. And right now, there isn't an ability to, or an easy ability to, process the uranium for the plant. So Chris Levesque, the CEO, told me that this initially will be dependent on processing facility in South Africa. So there's still a lot of hurdles to getting this kind of technology widespread. I think it could be a pretty big deal.
Well, thank you so much, Kirk Siegler, Western correspondent at NPR's National Desk.
My pleasure.
Leaving home is a rite of passage for many Wyoming kids. About 2/3 move out of the state by the time they're 30. As schools, businesses, and the government try to figure out how to keep them here, we wanted to hear from young adults how they're thinking about their futures. Here's a smattering of voices from the University of Wyoming.
I'm a freshman. I am from Cowley, Wyoming. I would absolutely love to stay in Wyoming. I love the whole culture here. I love that even in the cities, it's still a small town vibe, and that you can really get to know people and things like that. I am going to be an art teacher, hopefully, so I really hope that I would be able to stay in Wyoming. I feel like the schools are pretty good here, and I want to be able to help out people like that. A lot of people would like to stay, but they'll take them where their job takes them, is what I hear a lot of. I think I'll find a way to stay one way or another because I really do love it here.
I'm from Thermopolis.
I'm from Douglas, Wyoming. We've been living together for a while. We're thinking about maybe moving to Colorado. Probably Fort Collins. That's somewhere that there's like cool dinner theaters and like a lot of cool like public art and like cool graffiti and stuff. So just a different atmosphere would be nice to live in.
With bigger areas, there comes more unique people and more creative people. There's a lot of creativity in Wyoming, that's fine. But like diversity, that's what I'm talking about. There's just a huge span of different people that you can meet and people who are interested in so many different ideas. It feels like Wyoming is very traditionalist in some ways.
It is kind of a bubble.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's a bubble.
I don't know that I have much of a fleshed out idea why, but like kind of gut instinct it feels like to go just kind of stretch your wings a little bit, just see what else is out there, even if it means going out and seeing what there is and deciding that that's maybe not right and then coming back.
I am a senior. I'm graduating in May, but I'll be coming back for grad school in the fall. I don't think I want to work here necessarily after college, but I would love to go back home and retire. I'm from Lander, Wyoming. Lander especially has a lot of opportunities in the outdoors. I think it's where I've lived my entire life. I'd like to try something new, maybe something coastal. We are a landlocked state, so that isn't a huge option here. I feel like a lot of students don't see a ton of opportunities maybe necessarily in their field to work here in Wyoming. We do have a super small population, so a lot of students know that they might need to go somewhere else to find a job.
So I am a junior. I'm a transfer student, so this is my first year here. I'm from Kemmerer, Wyoming. I love mostly the western part of Wyoming. I'm hoping to become a counselor, and I think there's a lot of need for that in Wyoming. And so I'm hoping that's what it's going to be like once I get out. But if anything, I'll try to, be in Idaho but then come back over. It's just I love the community. Personally, I am not a big cities fan, and also I just have family here, so it's just I'd rather stay here. That's my main goal.
That was Natalie Grant, Eden Freeman, Miriam Harris, Claire Lane, and Jordan Zobel. Wyoming Public Radio's Hannah Merzbach produced the story. Powerlifting is possible at any age. Up next, we meet a 68-year-old woman who proves that. This is Open Spaces.
The latest season of The Modern West is now available for your binging pleasure.
My generation, we can't afford anything.
It's all about the oddball workarounds Westerners are finding for the affordable housing crisis.
I was constantly stressed where I was going to park, and then at times I woke up, I'm like, what am I doing? This is crazy.
Cheap Dirt. Download all 10 episodes at wyomingpublicmedia.org or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Open Spaces. Powerlifting isn't just for gym rats with protein shakes. Ask Suze Lure. She's 68 and lives in Laramie. Over a decade ago, Lure was hit by a truck while riding her bike down Grand Avenue, breaking her femur and fracturing her pelvis. She recovered, but years later,
I was not able to climb up steps without compensating with my right leg, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks that that I was failing badly here and didn't even realize it.
Then her physical therapist introduced her to deadlifting. Laura started going to a regular meetup for seniors at her local gym. Now she's a powerlifting champion with a win at the Senior Olympics in Cheyenne last year. This year, she was named an AARP Senior Planet-sponsored athlete, one of only 5 in the nation. Wyoming Public Radio's Hannah Haberman tagged along with Laura for a workout.
So, are there clamps? Yeah. So if something tipped or something, you won't lose weight off the end. Deadlift then, keep the back straight, bend the knees. Let's see. What you want to do is grab the bar, and I usually do a switch called switch grip. So I grab here and here, and then you take the slack out of the bar, and then lift and push through your feet. So you act like you're pushing your feet through the floor. So that's how you do deadlifts. It's 110 pounds, but that's what I weigh. This is what I weigh. So, and you want to act like you're closing a door with your butt.
And you're about to lift your entire body weight.
Yeah. Yes. I do like deadlift. I can lift a little over 200 pounds. So I enjoy deadlifts. So that's my thing.
And when you first started deadlifting, did it feel easy? Were you like, oh, I'm intuitively pretty good at this? Or what was that arc like?
After my accident, that's when I did it in PT. My PT was the one that introduced me to the deadlift. And so that's where I began that. And it felt right. There. You just stand up and you put it down the same way you lift it up.
It's a lift with your legs situation?
Lift with your legs. At that last meet I went to, after the whole meet was over, this guy came up to me, this big burly bearded guy, and said, "You are built for deadlift. You should never quit deadlifting. Never quit. You are." And he explained how my arms, my short legs help, and my arms are a little longer than the average. I don't know. And so my husband, of course, likes to call me ape arms now. Thanks to that. Get your thighs a little lower than parallel.
Wow.
So that's the goal of squats. The group here is how I got into this all. It's a seniors weight training class. So Jared got a grant for it, and it's gone on, we're in the 3rd year now, and that's why we have such a big group of seniors weightlifting right now here in Laramie, and there's 2 others in the state.
My name's Jared Nelson. I'm the Chief Sports Scientist for the Wyoming Senior Wellness Initiative, or SWI. Suze was one of our earliest participants when we were just getting the program off the ground. Suze came in and started with no lifting experience. Is that right? Do I remember that correctly? Yeah.
Pretty much.
And, yeah, in the last, 2-3 years, she's gotten very strong, now competing in powerlifting. So incredibly impressive work from her.
I'm in a book club, and two of the gals were talking with each other, and I'm like, I might try that. So I just showed up the next day and never left. We've got upwards of 50 people in our class. So we break into 5 different groups and have to just keep rotating throughout these stations, or will never get us out of the gym. So we have to keep these people moving. It's the people that have really kept me coming back.
So what we're doing here is applying heavy load to bones, connective tissues, joints, muscles to prevent tissue loss, and then also just increasing the integrity and strength of these tissues. It greatly reduces risks of falling. It greatly increases your chances of a better outcome should you fall. If you do contract chronic disease later in life, you have a much greater chance of success with treatment. But the main thing here is just to prevent long-term mobility limitations that can cause you to end up in a nursing home. Also, dementia and Alzheimer's are a huge threat to people's health later in life, and resistance training is actually one of the most robust preventative measures you can do for those, because it's a workout for muscles, but also for your central nervous system as well.
Even up your hands a little bit. Some people go wide, some people go narrow. So whatever's most comfortable for you, that
how's
looks
that look?
good.
Better?
That looks good, yeah.
Okay.
So,
how much do you think is mental in weightlifting?
Probably about 80%, 90%. I'd say a lot.
Yeah.
The heavier the weights, the more the mental power it takes. Yeah.
I guess, what do you think about when you're like thinking about the mental part of weightlifting? Is it like confidence in yourself?
It helps having a cheerleading section. It helps having people around you that also believe in you. And got to believe in yourself. It's when I don't think I can do it that is when I usually don't pull it off. So yeah, it's 95% mental maybe. Champion's definitely a stretch. Like I said, there's not many people in my age and weight category, so I win every time, right?
I think that means you're just good. You are one of like AARP's 5 sponsored athletes this year. And to you, what does that mean?
It comes with some responsibility. I find that, and I'm looking forward to it. I want to encourage people who maybe have physical limitations and drawbacks, like what I went through and came out the other end. I want people to know that they can too.
And Suze, what words of advice would you have to people who are maybe curious about getting into exercise or getting back into exercise, but they're not sure where to start?
Find a coach. Find a coach or a class like this, someplace that you can learn proper techniques, because you would definitely want to start out with the right techniques. Start light. Don't jump into heavy weights right off the bat. You'll work up to that. Your confidence and weight will come with time and persistence. But the key is just to start. If nothing else, get out and walk. Get your body moving.
That was a snippet from Wyoming Public Radio's Hannah Haberman on a trip to the gym with Laramie powerlifter Suze Luhr. When someone is badly injured, the race to the hospital is critical. But as the Mountain West News Bureau's Rachel Cohen reports, a growing number of first responders in our region, including Wyoming Life Flight Air Ambulance, are starting to do more on the scene with one of medicine's most powerful tools.
In the back room of a fire station, Jill Reidenauer opens a package. Printed on the side, in all caps, it reads human blood.
The color of the blood is good.
Reidenauer is a supervisor for emergency medical services in Summit County, Colorado ski country. The clear pouch is filled with dark liquid.
It's kind of dark red purplish. There are no bubbles at the top.
Earlier this year, Reidenauer administered this kind of blood for the first time to a trauma patient in the field.
And as the blood was going in, you could just see her blood pressure improve. It was pretty neat.
The patient was stabilized and taken to the hospital.
There are times that no matter what we do, we can't help. And this is something that can give someone a fighting chance.
This is called whole blood, and it's the centerpiece of a new idea to let emergency responders give transfusions at the scene of an accident instead of having to wait until patients get to the hospital. People in serious car crashes or ski accidents can lose a lot of blood quickly. The faster they get blood, the better their chances of surviving. Laura Harwood is a former trauma nurse and helped start the Colorado Whole Blood Coalition. For decades, she says, medics were trained to give fluids like saline.
I keep referring to it as a revolution because it's an entire upending of the way that people think about it.
whole blood is special. When you get a transfusion at the hospital, it's usually split into components like plasma or platelets. Whole blood keeps it all together, which Harwood says is better. It can help stop the bleeding and jumpstart recovery. But whole blood isn't entirely new. Soldiers used it in World War I, and it made a comeback during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
As those physicians and nurses and everybody started coming back, they started saying, hey, we should look at how to bring this to civilian trauma patients.
Research followed. One study showed receiving blood before the hospital decreased patients' chance of dying by 37%.
There's no other single variable that's been associated with that strong of an impact.
The Colorado Whole Blood Coalition is working to get more fire and emergency medical services on board. 15 have launched programs in the state in the last 2 years. First responders in Idaho, Utah, and Nevada have recently started carrying the blood. But across the country, very few agencies do. Keeping the blood fresh is a daily task. James Levi runs EMS for another Summit County agency.
They're in ready-to-go coolers that are conditioned every day to keep that temperature between 1 and 6 degrees Celsius the entire time.
He says the blood expires in about a month, so they need a steady supply. Setting up these programs is expensive. But the federal government is starting to invest, dedicating $80 million to pre-hospital blood programs with more grants on the way. Jonathan Morrison leads the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
Ideally, I think this would just be a standard part of the trauma treatment for crash victims or other trauma victims.
He points out that more than 40% of people who die in car crashes are still alive when first responders arrive, meaning there's a window to act. Summit County, Colorado is seeing results. Ridenauer says her first patient recovered well at the hospital.
For me, it was kind of one of the coolest things that I've been able to do in my career, and I've been privileged to work this job for a long time.
She says it's a gift to be able to carry whole blood and to know she can make a difference. For the Mountain West News Bureau, I'm Rachel Cohen.
It's no secret that wildfire officials are worried about this year's wildfire season. Up next, we hear how some big administrative changes could affect responses. This is Open Spaces.
Hi, I'm Grady Kirkpatrick, inviting you to join me for Wyoming Sounds. Along with your favorites, you'll discover plenty of new music. We bring you NPR news updates, weather, and we'll let you know about events happening around Wyoming. Wyoming Sounds from 9 to noon on Wyoming Public Radio and 24/7 online at wyomingsounds.org.
Welcome back to Open Spaces. From Wyoming Public Radio, I'm Camila Kadelska. This fire season is set to be historic, but not just because of the record low snowpack and spring heat wave. It will also be the first for the U.S. Wildland Fire Service, a new Department of the Interior agency formed from its multiple fire programs. The Mountain West News Bureau's Murphy Woodhouse spoke with its inaugural chief, Brian Fennessy, and also spoke with critics and advocates about what the service means for wildfire.
Brian Fennessy grew up in the Los Angeles area and got into wildland fire straight out of high school in the late 1970s. He mostly worked on and eventually led interagency hotshot crews, among the most respected in the country. Even decades ago, he says there were questions about why federal wildfire response was split between multiple agencies.
Throwing dirt is throwing dirt, right? And hiking Jeep cans up the hills, doesn't matter what patch you're wearing, it's the same work. And, why wouldn't there be one agency?
Nearly 5 decades after he first dug Fireline, Fennessy was hired as the U.S. Wildland Fire Service's very first chief. The service was formed earlier this year by consolidating the fire programs of several Department of Interior agencies, including those of the Bureau of Land Management and National Park Service. That came in the wake of a June 2025 Trump administration executive order that called for the Departments of Agriculture and Interior to consolidate their fire programs to the maximum degree practicable. But for now, the massive Forest Service fire program remains within agriculture. In announcing the new agency, Interior Secretary Doug Burgum said it would improve fire response.
I believe in what they're talking about, reduction of bureaucracy, alignment in mission, firefighters reporting to firefighters, the fire service having not only the authority, but being held accountable for making fire decisions.
In a recent video shared by AccuWeather, torching timber in Montana's Eastside fire sends billowing smoke into the air. A striking sight so far north, so early in the year.
Look, that house is literally right there, you guys.
The Plain States have already seen ripping grass fires, including one in Nebraska that ran over 600,000 acres. Georgia has already lost more than 100 homes. Incredible is how Fennessy described these early season incidents.
I'm seeing columns and plume-dominated fire behavior. It's like, what? That's the Southeast.
But early signs of a potentially epic season isn't the only worry in the air. Many experts are also anxious about what the new service means for this summer and summers to come. Some see it as representing a severing of land and fire management. Here's Wilderness Society President Tracy Stone Manning, who served as Biden's BLM director.
You can't manage and be a land steward without managing wildfire. Right? These lands are evolved with wildfire. Everybody in the West lives in a fire landscape. So the idea of decoupling those two things is very dangerous.
Previously, Fennessy explains, fire officials were subordinate to land management officials. The big change, he says, is that now final authority for fire line decisions rests with the Wildland Fire Service. But success requires close collaboration.
They're exactly right. Wildfire is interwoven in all of it and has to be. I mean, we have to be standing side by side by our land managers and these land management agencies.
There's also the age-old debate of when to suppress fires and when to light them intentionally or allow them to burn for ecological benefits and community protection. Pointing to his department's obligation to protect communities, Secretary Burgum recently wrote in a memo to fire leadership that, quote, "We will enter this season with the presumption of a full suppression strategy applied to every wildfire under DOI management." While acknowledging the importance of prescribed fires, Burgum said they will be allowed only, quote, "and in all caps when conditions permit." Here's how that sounded to Dave Cocken, an influential fire scientist who previously worked more than 2 decades at the Forest Service.
It is make every fire go away as quickly and easily as possible. And that's what we've been trying for 100 years and have failed miserably at, which is why we're in a crisis.
Many researchers and officials say that there is an extraordinary deficit of low and moderate intensity fires on many western landscapes.
The more we suppress fire, the more fuels we get on the landscape. The more fuels we get on the landscape, when fires do occur, they're much harder to suppress and much more likely to be damaging.
Here's Chief Fennessy.
What I like about the Secretary's intent memo is that, it's clear. This is what we're doing. It's not ambiguous. We are suppressing, we're getting after fire.
That's based in part, he explains, on just how extreme the conditions already are this year. But he's also frank about the long-term prospects of emerging from the wildland fire crisis without substantial increases in fuels reduction treatments like prescribed fire, which can counter the buildup of fuels.
Suppression's important, and it always will be. But you know as well as I do, if we don't really start having a bigger impact in treating the landscape, we're not going to get out of this. We're not going to suppress our way out of this situation.
And he says consolidation could help provide capacity for more of that mitigation work. But there are also concerns about capacity for the already started fire season. Here's Stone Manning, the former BLM director.
I'm worried that the administration has gutted our land management agencies, that there are thousands and thousands of people who don't work there anymore who did last summer, and that we're not going to have enough people to do the job.
In the wake of Trump administration cuts to the federal workforce, states across the West saw public land agency employees fall by double-digit percentages. Fennessy noted that fire personnel were exempted from the deferred resignation program and other efforts early in the Trump administration. But he also argued that some of those who chose to leave may have been planning on retiring anyway, and that many of those who took deferred resignations may still be available during the fire season. He says firefighter hiring for the season is going as planned and that they expect to have at least as many as last year, some 5,700 wildland fire personnel along with 900 tribal firefighters. But Calkin is also worried about what happens when the season really picks up. Preparedness levels are at their highest, and the specialized teams that handle the most serious incidents start to stretch thin.
So what happens when we're in PL5, when we have 25 available complex incident management teams, and there's 80 fires, 80 large ripping fires?
Are we going to run out of them quickly? Should we get really busy? I think so.
Fennessy says other teams can pull up some of the slack, and he'd like to do more to train up the next generation of incident command. Even among critics, there's respect for Fennessy's experience and hope that consolidation could bring some positive changes. Timothy Inglesby with the wildfire advocacy group FUSI shares many of Stone Manning and Calkin's concerns, but called the new chief an exceptional individual.
He has a lot of trust amongst the crews. The question is, how much latitude does he have from the administration?
In Fennessy, many firefighters see someone who has put in the same hard fire line hours that they have and paid a high price. He says he was successfully treated for prostate cancer, which he chalked up to his career.
I look at things like cancer awareness and prevention. That's got to be at the top. Right next to, health and wellness. Those two things are the very top of my priorities.
We believe that they selected the right person for the job.
Luke Mayfield, a former hotshot and co-founder of the advocacy group Grassroots Wildland Firefighters, says it's hard to overstate how significant it is to have someone with that experience at the head of the service. He's a strong supporter of consolidation, but says the benefits will be hard fought.
This is going to be messy.
And the first thing, he says, will be to take care of the firefighters. For the Mountain West News Bureau, I'm Murphy Woodhouse.
Wildfires carry a lot of obvious risks: burning houses, fence line, pasture. But what happens in the first few years after a fire has its own hazards, too. A big one is landslides, also called debris flows. That's what happened outside of Dayton in the Bighorns last summer in the burn scar of the Elk Fire. Jamie Kostelnik is with the U.S. Geological Survey and studied this area specifically. Her team recently published an interactive story map with photos, visualized data sets, and a chronology of the slide's impacts. She spoke with Wyoming Public Radio's Nikki Woolat.
Basically, we say a debris flow is a flash flood on steroids. They kind of start moving down slope, and then the flow picks up some trees and it picks up some boulders, and it gets higher and higher. So it carries a lot of material. We say it bulks up. Then they can travel as fast as 35 miles an hour. And they can travel miles beyond the burn area, depending on the rainfall conditions, the topography where they initiate. But yeah, so it's like a slurry of concrete, a slug of concrete moving downhill very, very quickly, not slowly. And they can and do take out houses and cars and really anything in their path.
So on July 15th, 2025, thunderstorms hit the area where the Elk Fire had burned a little less than a year before. This was a 100,000-acre fire in the fall of 2024 on the east side of the Bighorn Mountains. I think you visited the site shortly after this storm hit. Can you paint me a picture of what you saw?
Prior to that storm, Landslide Hazards Program had installed a monitoring station in one of the drainages in the Elk Fire. And that monitoring station just collects rainfall data. It has a video camera that is triggered when it rains at a certain intensity. It measures soil moisture conditions. And so we had prepared that something could happen there because it was steep, and our hazard map showed that there was a high likelihood of hazard, and there was a Highway 14 was just downslope of that burn drainage. Folks on our project went out. I did not go on the first visit. They were out there immediately, 8 days later, and then they saw where the Department of Transportation had cleaned up on Highway 14. We also followed the media. We saw that guardrails had been knocked out. The road had been covered with mud, rocks, other debris. And then we just hiked that whole burn area, and we walk through and we say, okay, something happened at this road, but where in the backcountry did things happen? Can we go out and see that channels or stream beds that had been empty prior to the storm were now filled with rocks and, burned vegetation? mud. And then we sort of take a little GPS unit out and we click, yes, this happened here. No, this didn't happen here. And then that data is what's used to support research.
These rainfall events that trigger these slides or debris flows, how much rain are we talking about?
Rainfall rates are not fun and interesting, but we look at 24 millimeters an hour. It's when your windshield wipers are on high. So when you're driving and you have to go from that low setting to a high setting, that's enough to trigger one of these things. It did rain harder than that in July. It rained about just under a half an inch in 15 minutes is what kicked those flows off. The harder it rains, the bigger these things can be.
Why are areas that have previously burned more likely to slide than other areas?
Because you have removed the vegetation. So really just you're intercepting rainfall by trees and shrubs and grass. So that's no longer happening. And then when the soil reaches a certain temperature, it changes the properties and it becomes hydrophobic, which basically it's just repelling water rather than absorbing the rainwater the way it would before.
This is like when I neglect my house plants and then it just runs right through.
Right, exactly. If you look out the window and it's raining on the grass, it's one thing. Then you look on the road and all of a sudden the road has turned into a river. So imagine a burned mountain is behaving as if rain is falling on the road surface rather than a surface that's covered with grass, other vegetation.
What are some of the other impacts that these flows can have?
It's like the joke is if a debris flow happens in the forest and no one's around, does anybody care other than the 7 of us that work on this project? But it turns out that there are trails and campgrounds that will often remain closed even after a area starts to recover because there is still an elevated risk of flash flooding and debris flows. The water quality, if it's the water source for a community, then that's a real problem. They have moved fish populations in high hazard areas because it is a certain type of, cutthroat trout stream. And if this sediment comes down and clogs up this particular tributary, then it could result in a large fish kill. So those are all impacts that we've seen just in the last several years.
How long does that heightened hazard risk remain?
As a rule, it remains elevated 1 to 3 years. So that depends, the recovery, as we call it, also depends on you're not getting rain, so vegetation is not coming back. I will say when we were out there in September, sure, it had greened up. These areas come back sometimes faster than people expect when it's so devastating to see this beautiful landscape that's been charred. But 1 to 3 years is really the window.
Is every fire, are the conditions right for these kind of debris flows?
Absolutely. Fires are getting more frequent. They're getting bigger. The fires are coming closer to where people live, and rainfall is becoming more intense. So even though we're in drought conditions, we're seeing these intense rainstorms. So yeah, we expect it to continue. And, we kind of manage where things happen. And the data shows that in the last 10 years, there's just been a real increase in these types of events.
Is there anything that homeowners or property owners can do to mitigate these risks?
The most important thing you can do is not be around when it rains, or maybe more importantly, listen to the National Weather Service. Every time we do an assessment, we send our numbers to the local weather forecasting office, and we give them this guidance like, when it rains this hard, things might start to kick off. You should be concerned. So we work directly with them, and they are the ones that, just like they issue a flash flood watch, they'll issue debris flow warnings, which they did for the Elkburn area for that July 15th storm. And you can't stop them. You can't slow them down. There are barrier structures and diversion channels, but know that a flow could overtake something. A homeowner does. If you divert the flow and it goes into your neighbor's yard and whacks their house, you may be responsible. So our advice is always, you know where water flows downhill. don't be around that if you're below a burn area. And your local authorities are well tuned to what's happening. The Department of Transportation, the emergency management offices, they're really the experts because they know where things happen. And if they close roads or if they tell you to evacuate, it's really important to listen.
Well, Jamie, thank you so much. This has been fascinating.
Thank you.
Up next, Liz Bird would have turned 100 last month. We hear more about the life and legacy of Wyoming's first Black legislator on Open Spaces.
Can't have the radio on all day but want to keep up to date with Wyoming news? Then check out our new daily podcast, the Wyoming Debrief. Get daily news around Wyoming and test your knowledge of the Cowboy State with some trivia. All of that in under 10 minutes. Find Wyoming Debrief wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Open Spaces. Liz Bird, Wyoming's first Black lawmaker, would have turned 100 years old last month. Bird died in 2015. She served in the Wyoming House of Representatives and eventually the Senate. But before her political career, she was a teacher, a career she had to fight for in the equality state. Cody Enterprises' Pierce Bowvie wrote an article remembering Bird on her 100th birthday. We spoke over Zoom.
So you open your profile of Liz with an anecdote from her childhood about the little red hen. Tell me about what that book meant to her.
Well, that book for her was really a gateway. I mean, she'd read it with her father every night. That was her favorite book. And he would ask her, like, hey, do you want a different book? And she'd be like, no, this is my favorite book. And so, it really made an impression with her. She brought it to class and, read it. I say that in parentheses, quotations, that she actually, read. Really, she was just reciting it. And she was in first grade, probably like 6 or 7. So it was a gateway for her realizing that she wanted to be a teacher through that book. And that experience, that book kind of opened up for her.
What was her childhood like?
So from an early age, education was definitely instilled on her. Like, hey, to get ahead in education can definitely help you succeed. So I think from a young age, she was taught to value like being educated, reading, writing, and just learning all you can learn. So I think that was from having that present in her at a young age, definitely affected her throughout her life.
Can you tell me a little bit about her family and their connection to Wyoming?
So I believe the date is 1876. Her grandfather, Robert Roan, came to Wyoming knowing that they were freed slaves and there'd be opportunities for them there to work on the railroads, which her father ended up working the railroads as well, and to, really create a life in a state that would give them the opportunity to create a life. So I read that her grandfather was a cowboy and worked for the railroad, and that kind of established her life there. Her having that background, her family came for work, it really helped establish Wyoming's place in her heart. Like, hey, there's opportunity here. We can have a life here. And she was very proud to be from Wyoming.
Why didn't she go to University of Wyoming?
She wanted to go there. She talked about in a 2003 interview with Wyoming PBS that she was able to register for classes, but there's a caveat. They couldn't find a place for her to stay, pretty much saying, hey, you can't actually attend here. So what she did instead was she had a jar, put all the names of states in the jar except Wyoming, Colorado, and said, okay, whatever name I pick out of this jar, that's where I'll go to college at. And she picked West Virginia and went to West Virginia State University. It was a historically Black university, which is an experience for her. She grew up in Wyoming. She was usually often used to being like the Black student. It really opened her up to the world, and just they commented on her what she was wearing. She was wearing a Western jacket. So it was really a cultural experience for her, just going from west to east, and just her tenacity at being a teenager and saying, I'll go wherever I pick a name out of a jar.
How did Liz end up back in Wyoming after being in West Virginia?
Her heart's always been in Wyoming, so she wanted to come back here and teach. And again, she's faced another barrier. A public school teacher wouldn't let an African-American woman teach, in a public classroom. So she had to find a caveat, she had to teach at the Warren Air Force Base. And she did that for about 10 years. She actually found it really encouraging. She said that was a great time in her life. She really learned a lot about herself. But after 10 years, she said, hey, I'm ready to be in a public school. That's where I want to be. And again, she was met with resistance. And eventually she reached out to Governor John Joseph Hickey, and she said, hey, is there anything you can do to get me in public school? And he says, don't worry, work something out. And then after 10 years teaching at the Air Force Base, she started teaching at the public schools in 1959. And of course, she excelled. She was, I think, Teacher of the Year one year, and everyone who had her as teacher said she was the best teacher. So proving that she belonged there all along.
So how did she decide to run for Wyoming House of Representatives?
Initially, she wasn't interested in running, but her father, who has really been a big motivator throughout her whole life, said, I think she should run for politics. And she said, what do you mean? But to honor his wishes, she did. Also, the time he was dying of cancer, she said, you know what? I'm going to do this. So she ran the primary, the Democratic primary, and she won. And she was kind of shocked. And unfortunately, between the general and the primary, her father passed away of cancer. But she said, you know what? To honor him and, what he encouraged me to do, I'm really going to give my office in her election. And in 1980, she became the first Black legislator voted into the Wyoming legislature. It was pretty awesome. And all because her father really motivated her to do it.
So she was in the legislature in the 1980s, and she faced more discrimination during that time for being a woman. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So I spoke to her son, James, who's also running for U.S. Senate right now. He said, yeah, they faced constant ill treatment. He said the thing she had to deal with was a lot of people would give up. And he didn't know about that till later. Like, she didn't really talk about it much. He said he didn't realize till years later all she and her female colleagues had to put up with. And it's weird because in some ways back then the legislature functioned a lot better. It wasn't as divisive, it wasn't as partisan politics. But in a lot of ways it was still like, it was kind of a sexist environment. She just took it, and everyone who talked with said, she handled herself with dignity and grace, that she didn't let that disturb her. She just kept marching on and persisting.
What achievements stand out to you from her life, and why?
Well, the big one is, passing Martin Luther King Day here in Wyoming. That's probably the one she's most known for, but she was known for a lot of things. She passed the seatbelt law. Her whole thing was she cared about kids. That's like her life's focus was like, helping children and like educating them, make sure they're going to have great lives. And, seatbelts play a part in that. And she helped push that legislation through. And also some fun things, like she helped, legalize the lottery here in Wyoming. That neat things about that you wouldn't realize. Also, her help was like adults who, have disabilities, make sure they have more access to funds and like services. So she was really fighting for like the common person, the underdog. That was her whole fight, like people who the have-nots.
So it's been 100 years since her birth. Why is it important to remember her?
Because when you leave a legacy like that, you need to know that your time here mattered. And it did. She really made an impact, and both at a political level, but just who she was as a person. When people talk about her, it's not always about her as a politician, just who she was as a human being, her internal qualities, her patience, her kindness, the time she'd give to people. I think those would really make her resonate when people who actually knew her. But when someone's lived life in such a meaningful way, they deserve recognition.
Well, thank you, Pierce Bao V, for being here today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Camilla, for speaking with me.
Thank you for listening to Open Spaces. The entire show and all the stories you heard here can be found on our website at wyomingpublicmedia.org. It can also be found wherever you get your podcasts, and we post all our stories on the station's social media platforms. Those are Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, X, and Blue Sky. Nikki Loulette and I edited this episode. Hannah Haberman was our audio producer, Ivy Engel, our digital producer, and Cody Hume, our social media manager. Open Spaces is a production of Wyoming Public Radio News.